What's up, everybody? Welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Whitney or Whit Garner. I'm a GMAT Jerry, an executive assessment instructor here at Manhattan Prep. And I am so excited today to join you all in our Mastering the GMAT RC series, our three-part series. This is the third and final. You've already seen humanities style passages and you've seen science passages, and now we're doing some business passages today. If you have not seen those earlier too, that's fine. Welcome. But you can find those linked in GMAT Club. The recordings for those are also in the chat. I believe they should be in the comments, the links to those. And so you can always find those in the video description for this as well. You can find more of those videos. So good. So, well, welcome to all of you. I'm really excited. I feel like reading comprehension has often been an area that frustrates both test takers and instructors alike. For a long time, many of us sat around and thought, like, how in the world do we teach reading comprehension? Right? Like, how do you do that? Because it can be easy to think, well, how am I supposed to be better at reading? Like, shouldn't I have learned that when I was 7? Like, what I don't know how to be better at that now. But hopefully, if you've attended the previous two, and then hopefully by the end of today, you'll see that improving in reading comprehension for a test isn't the same as like just trying to become a better reader. That these standardized exams are standardized, which means that even the questions themselves have to be standardized. The way they ask the questions is standardized, and the way they ask you to retrieve the information is also standardized. So I'm super excited to show you kind of the culmination of many years of work with Manhattan Prep, where we've really dug into trying to think about how do we improve reading comprehension on a standardized exam. So from those of you, right, welcome, welcome, welcome. I would love, before we jump in, to hear where all of you are located. I've got Kid Colt already let me know, Zambia. Good evening, where you are. If we've got folks from all over, please let me know where you're located. I'm located in North Carolina. That's on the East Coast of the United States. So if you were to look at a map of the United States and you were to go about halfway between New York and Florida, most people know where to find those two states. There's like almost a weird elbow that comes out of the right side of the country. That's North Carolina. So I'm in right outside of the capital of North Carolina. I'm actually in a town called Durham. And the coolest thing about Durham, many of you who are applying to business schools here in the US may know, we are the home of Duke University, so the Fuqua School of Business. So welcome, welcome. I've got folks from all over. I've got Bangalore, Bangladesh. So please definitely type in the chat window. Let me know where you're coming to me from. I can't wait to hear. Right? I love it. Well, so good evening to many of you. Yeah. Let's jump in. So just a like very quick little overview, right? I don't want to spend forever. I know that many of you already know this test decently well. The verbal section of the GMAT is 23 questions in 45 minutes. So just under 2 minutes per question. And it's broken down into two major question families. We have critical reasoning style questions and reading comprehension style questions. So today, focusing on reading comp. But sometimes I think it is important to understand what the test is testing when you are facing each of these types of questions. So when the GMAT is trying to test your verbal reasoning skills, they're looking at two specific things. One, can I give you a small argument that is based on some sort of logic? And can you, I don't want to say attack that logic, but can you think more critically about that logic? Can you ask questions of the logic? Can you take this very detailed argument and say strengthen it? Can you weaken it? Can you identify assumptions in the author's logic? Or could you even develop your own inference or conclusion from the given facts without adding your own assumptions and interpretations? So that's critical reasoning. You'll be given a single paragraph and then one question. Are you strengthening, weakening, evaluating? Are you trying to identify and explain a discrepancy and so on? 5 answer choices. So each critical reasoning exercise is a single paragraph with a single question about it. And the job there is to be analytical, to be critical, to look at the argument and think, wait, is this true? Are we sure that this is true? What are some things that would make this less likely to be true? That's very different from what we're doing when we're doing reading comprehension. So in the world of reading comprehension, it is essential that you understand that we aren't really critically thinking. So our job in reading comprehension is to take a big chunk of text, and then go look for the answer to very specific questions. Now, I want you to think about this in a sort of real world setting. Imagine, right, that your job is like you work for a company and you're going into kind of getting ready to run into a meeting, right? Now, I'll kind of give you a good example to use. We'll come back, right? So, your boss is asking you to go back through a bunch of press releases from this company that you're going to work with, right? So, you're a consultant, and Acme Co is this company that you've decided that you and your team are going to do some consulting with. And your boss is like, there have been a bunch of press releases. Here's also some of the technical stuff that Acme Co's put out. I need you to read the past months of them because I'm about to walk into a meeting. And so the thing that you want to be thinking about here is I'm reading someone else's words, right? I'm reading someone else's research. I'm reading someone else's claims, and I need to report to my boss about them, right? I need to report to my boss about these claims. But I want to be really careful that when I'm reporting, I'm not putting my own opinions in, right? Because the initial kind of canvas of text, canvas of fact is what is the logic that the outside world is giving us? So I don't want to input my own beliefs, my feelings, my opinions, right? Anything I'm bringing from outside is not allowed in this first kind of pass. That's the point of reading comprehension. So when we've got critical reasoning, where your job is to be like analytical and think critically and pick an argument apart, your job in reading comprehension is to read a passage that's usually about 300 to 600 words. Short passage will be on like the 300-ish word. Long passage will be the 500 to 700 word end to your question in the window. My job is to read this and not editorialize, meaning I'm not here to read it and summarize it in my own opinion. I'm here to read it and excerpt it literally. Another way I find that can be a helpful way to think about reading comp is that I am reading to like testify with this information. And I do not want somebody to call my responses into question. I want, if I say, oh yeah, this is the answer, and somebody says, is that really true? I want to be able to point to the words in the passage that verify that it's true. Right. So I don't want to go tiptoeing out into the real world when I'm working on reading comprehension. The answer to every reading comprehension question comes off the screen. I am not bringing in new information. I am not bringing in new opinions. This is the opposite in many ways of what we'll be doing with critical reasoning. With critical reasoning, you will be bringing in outside information actually quite a bit, and you will be kind of synthesizing details as you move through it. So, right, reading comprehension. Are you a good researcher? Can you process a large amount of information and then, when asked for a specific detail, recall enough so that you know where to go and extract that piece of information? Okay, so we're not memorizing a passage. We are reading to get an understanding so that then, when we're asked for specific bites of research, we know where to go find those specific bites of research. Yeah. So, critical reasoning and reading comp make up about 50-50 of this exam. I've seen a little bit more on the reading comp side than the critical reasoning, but not by a lot. So generally, reading comp is going to be 4 passages, and each of those 4 passages will have about 3 questions that accompany it. Now, those passages are anywhere from, again, short passages, couple hundred words, long passages, several hundred words. They might be a single paragraph in length. They might have 2, 3, or even 4 paragraphs. Now, they have started to shy away from a large number of long passages. It would appear that the test is usually more short passages and like one kind of longer one. But just know that you could face either short or long. So when we talk about how much time to give you to read, we'll be thinking about this like minute and a half to 2 minutes. If it's a short passage, like 200 words, you definitely want to be on that minute and a half end. If you're in a longer passage, we're looking at like 2-ish minutes. Now, again, this isn't enough time to take a ton of notes. This isn't a bunch of time to try to memorize every single fact in detail. Your job in this first read is to just figure out what generally is being talked about and where is various information. Because let's go back to, our boss and the Acme event, right? So we got our boss at the Acme event. We've got this month's worth of press releases, but they're huge. There's lots and lots of them. And even more, I have to take this call, right? We have to be on this call in 10 minutes. So I don't have a ton of time. I can't do some big giant write up. My job is to understand generally what's in each press release, right? What's in each paragraph, what's where, what is the kind of big picture that we're seeing emerge. And then if I have a specific question, my boss is probably gonna be like, where's the answer to this? I'm gonna have to go find it and re-show it to her. Yeah. So I just want you to be thinking about, I'm going to give you my take on the first read, right? And what I do while I read. And it may be a little different, both from what you've heard in the last two segments, because we think it's important that people understand their options. But it also may be different from what you do naturally. So I'm inviting you to maybe try on something a little bit different. My goal for you by the end of today is that you would be able to read, and if you would like to, make a passage of the map, a map of your passage. I don't make passage maps, so I'm going to show you a slightly different tweak on what I do in terms of staying kind of actively engaged with the passage. But generally, I find that the more I write, the less I understand and the slower I become. So if anything, I want you to start thinking about, hold your pen in your hand, but maybe hold it up against the screen so that it can be your little pointer, your little laser pointer to keep your eyes busy. Yeah. And then we'll look at several different types of reading comp questions that you'll encounter and kind of summarize what those look like. Now, if you like anything they're doing in the video, please make sure to like and subscribe, hang out with us. And then a friendly reminder, please put questions in the chat window. I'm happy to take them. Right? I'm more than happy to answer any and all questions that you've got. Right? So just hit me with them. Okay. So before we jump in to read, what I'd like to do is talk about kind of the three, again, big picture steps of, or like goals of reading as you read, right? So if I'm sitting here trying to read a big long passage, I need to start to break it down into smaller pieces. And so generally, I've got this kind of like big, I'm hit with this like, what is happening? I don't really know what's going on this passage. There's a lot happening. So as I read an individual sentence, I'm trying to get a sense of like, what is the basic message here? Right? Like if I've been reading and I've been kind of moving through, what's the context that this sentence lives within? What's been going on in this paragraph so far? And then I'm also trying to see, are there any sort of contrasting change in direction words like a but, a however, in spite of, right? Where is there language that's helping clue me into a passage that's maybe heading more deeply into the same information or giving me contradictory information? So I'm looking for what I might call foreshadowing language or punctuation that can help me get a sense of what's coming, right? So again, things like but and however. Quick question for the room. There's a couple of what I think are really important pieces of punctuation that often get ignored. And so I want y'all to help me in the chat window. A semicolon. What's the point of a semicolon? So what is the point of a semicolon? So a semicolon is this little guy. Okay, so it might mean like additional information, a continuation. We might use it. We often use a colon for that. We're going to talk about a colon as well. We're going to talk about an M dash. This one is called an M dash because it's like the length of the letter M as opposed to an N dash. Beautiful. Okay, so Saravanan gave me the perfect example of a semicolon. It splits a sentence into two independent clauses. It's kind of like an and, right? And so its job is to connect two complementary but maybe slightly different thoughts. So if we have a semicolon and you see that in a sentence, you're just going to want to think of a semicolon as a period, right? And an and. Like these two things are meant to be talked about together, but they don't necessarily have to be glued to one another, right? And then what about a colon? So I had a few people mention a colon as like, oh, a list is coming. Okay. Yes, we can totally use it to add information. That's one way to think of it. What's another? Anybody have any other ideas for why we would use a colon? I've actually had a colon save my neck a bunch of times in reading comprehension. And so I'm excited because most of the time people don't really know what a colon's doing. Mm-mm. What is a colon? And great question, Josh. I'm coming back to it, I promise. Great. So one of the things that a colon, I think most of us have seen this before. One of the things that we use for a colon is like a list or maybe a definition comes after it. You put like a word and then a colon. But generally, that's not how you're going to see a colon in reading comprehension. The way connecting the dots, I love that. That's so great. So here's actually what a colon, an easy way I've used to think about a colon is essentially a grammatic equal sign, right? So it's a grammatical equals. It means that what's before the colon and what's after the colon are the same. So if they were to give you a word and put a colon and then the definition, they're telling you this word and this definition mean the same thing. A list, it means that whatever we were talking about before is being exemplified by the list. They're the same. The GMAT, however, uses a colon and we'll put two sentences on either side. So I want you to think about this for a minute, right? We know that if it's two independent sentences with a semicolon between them, they're like related to each other. They're connected, but they're not the same. I'm telling you that if the test gives you two sentences with a colon in the middle, they are the same. And so what I love about the colon and what I would love to pass on for you, because it can help if you're stuck trying to understand something, is that the colon can be kind of replaced with the saying in other words. So if I just read a part of a sentence, and this happens so frequently, I'll read a sentence and then I'll hit a colon. And I'll realize that whatever I just read was super confusing. It involved some really technical language, and I didn't fully understand what was going on. But I see the colon. As soon as I see the colon, what that tells me is that they're about to reword it for me. They are about to say that exact same thing, but in different words, and usually easier words, a more simplistic way of putting it. Right. And so I want you to think about the fact that a colon is telling you that the two sides of the sentence are synonyms, they're the same. And so you can use that colon if you find yourself getting stuck or unsure of like, what is the message in this sentence? I'm not entirely sure. The other one is what we call an M dash. This is where we'd say like, blah, 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 some language. We're just talking, blah, 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 blah. And then we have a long dash. And so a long dash is technically the length of two dashes. It's called an M dash. And it's used for some emphasis as well as like parentheses. So you can think of it as often giving you examples of what was just being talked about or providing a little bit more emphasis, like, but it also means that you can read around it. So if you've got kind of an M dash happening in the middle of a sentence, it can sometimes be really helpful because they'll make a sentence really long. It can be helpful to pull that M dash out and read the sentence without it, then put that whole kind of parentheses back in and see what it means. Okay. So a couple of not just like contextual or like language change in direction, but I also want you to familiarize yourself with a little bit of punctuation. Semicolon, colon, M dash. Yeah? Okay. So as I'm reading individual little pieces, I'm starting to try and figure out what in the world is the basic message. Next, I want to know if there are paragraphs. What is the purpose of each paragraph? So once I've kind of finished a paragraph, I will then think to myself, okay, what did I just read? Now, pro tip, we often don't understand the importance of something until we read what's coming next. Okay. So I don't expect you at the end of a paragraph to understand fully what that paragraph's job was until you start to read the next paragraph. Because the next paragraph is going to tell you where the passage is continuing to go. And now that gives us more context to what we just read. Okay. So, a couple of things to keep in mind. You may not always understand exactly what's happening. You may have to read a little bit more to make sense of what you just read, right? So, not all sentences make sense in a vacuum. Sometimes you need the second sentence for the first sentence to fully make sense. Sometimes you need the second paragraph to get started before you fully understand what the first paragraph was doing. So, we want to get comfortable sitting with a little bit of like, I'm not sure what that says. Because we want to be very careful if we're not sure what something says, simply deciding what we think it says, because now we start making pretty bad assumptions. So our job is to try and use the clues, but also acknowledge that sometimes what we read is just going to be confusing, dense, hard to read. I had the lucky job of doing business articles today, so they'll be a little less confusing than the science and the humanities, but still. So we want to be able to sit with that kind of discomfort. That wait, I don't really know. I don't know what that meant. Okay, well, let me read another sentence and see if that helps. So, to an earlier question, right, as we continue to read, my big picture goal is not to have the passage memorized, to not know exactly every single detail, but to instead understand what was the author's main idea, what was the author's primary objective, right? I don't want to put my own on top of it. I want to be a very diligent researcher. Okay, I'm a good researcher. Mhm. So we're going to do a passage together along with a couple of questions so we can practice this variation. So first thing I always do when a question hits the screen, right? So when you have a reading comp passage, the passage will be on the left, and then you'd have a question on the right-hand side. You're welcome to skim the question on the right-hand side, totally allowed. Just know that you're going to have to read the whole passage for any of the questions to make sense. So your first job is really to focus on the passage. But again, sometimes I will look at the initial question just to kind of see if any words jump out at me. But for the most part, I'm going to look at the page and I'm going to see how many paragraphs I've got. Now, this is one of the very few things I do write down. So on my paper, I write down, 1, 2. Right? So I make a note to myself for the number of paragraphs. Notice I don't leave a ton of room because really what I'm going to put in each of these is just a couple of word blurb about what I think the point of that paragraph was. At most, I'll have 4 questions. At most, I want to be spending a minute and a half, minute 45 on each of them under standard time. So at most, I have to hold this passage in mind for 8 minutes. I don't need to write down a bunch of notes to keep a passage in mind for 8 minutes. And neither do you, right? Unless you have significant damage to like working memory centers of the brain, writing things down, if anything, like lots and lots and lots of stuff down, or what most people do when they write, which is transcribe, is just dangerous. It takes you away from the reading and it doesn't give people a better understanding. So here's my rule. If you're going to write it down, you thought about it first, you chewed on it, and you wrote your own version of shorthand down. We never copy anything off the screen when it comes to reading comp, ever. Okay. There are a couple of places where I will jot down some notes. Generally, I'll jot down notes if a passage, gave me an order of events, because sometimes a passage will be like, oh, well, B causes C, but A causes B and C causes D. And it gives it to me in that order. As I get to this second factoid, I start to realize, wait a minute, wait. They're giving me a chain of events. The temperatures rise, and then these kind of animals get more food. And when these animals have more food, then this happens. And when that happens, particularly in science passages. And so if I start to notice this, what I will do is try to get them down in order. So one of the few things I'll write is like, okay, this A causes B, causes C, causes D, right? With like a word for each one. The only other thing is if they line list something out. They're like, oh, okay, in order for this to work, blank and blank are required. And so that is a place where I would write, required 1, 2. Jot down a word about each one. Anything that they are very specific about. But that's it, right? If they enumerate things by saying, we need these 3 things, these 2 things, these 4 things must happen, right? That's the only time I'm really going to write anything of substance. generally, I'm going to engage in a little bit more of what I call circular, or like I almost think of it, for those of you that have like braided hair. It's like, the strand comes over and around, but then it comes back again, right? And so I braid my way through a passage. So we're gonna try it. Let's just make sure, if you need to, zoom in uh, on your screen, I need to make sure that you're able to read that sentence. And we're gonna slow this one down a little bit. I'm gonna give you the first paragraph. As soon as you've finished the first paragraph, I want you to give me a percent understanding of what you read, right? Not of what's coming, but a percent understanding. So you think you understand 80%, 60%, 20%? How do you feel? So let's give this one a go. Okay, so that's been about 45 seconds, which is not very long. But I have a question. Did anybody take note of how many sentences were in this paragraph? How many sentences are in this paragraph? So how many did y'all find? Two. I know. Can you believe that this is what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines long. 9 lines long. And it's 2 sentences. In fact, right? So I'm going to make a little bit of space for us to talk about some of this. In fact, the first sentence is just this little first part. The second one is insane. That makes things so hard to read. So I don't anticipate that I am going to read this by starting with the capital letter A and making it to the period without having to stop, bounce around, and reread. So one thing to note is the M dash with the such as, which I'm going to read around initially because that's huge. That thing's almost 2 lines long. Right. So one technique we're going to use is we're going to read around, like parenthetical stuff. But I also want to highlight for you a concept of like unpacking or deconstructing sentences. Okay. So the first sentence might not seem that crazy. But one of the things I found as I read harder and harder passages is that passages actually make more sense from the end, or sentences, excuse me, make more sense from the end backwards. So let me give you an example, and we'll come back to what each paragraph is doing. But I want to think about what this first sentence means simplistically. And I don't mean by just like switching out a new area of management books claims to organize the I don't want to just reread this with with synonyms. I want to start to pick this apart. Oh, and I'm so glad, Suti, I'm so glad you skipped it. That's awesome. So one of the things I know is like an emerging genre of management text that, okay, something new is claiming to do something. And so I'm trying to figure out all these little kind of pieces. It's like distinguishes financially successful businesses from those that fail. Okay, so in my mind, I'm considering, all right, some and I'm not writing this on my page, I'm just thinking it. Some businesses, are financially successful and versus some fail. Okay, so I've got, great. Some are successful, some fail. And it seems like people want to figure out what are the qualities and practices that land us in one versus the other. And there's a whole new set of books or texts or items coming out that are claiming to have a line list of this. So the kind of short version of this, if I were going to reframe this single sentence so that I could reframe it in the language of like a fifth or sixth grader, some businesses are financially successful and some fail. The thought is that there are qualities and practices that correlate to that. A new, bunch of materials are claiming that they have organized and cataloged those things. This one sentence, that's the kind of like I think easier to digest shorthand. If someone had just said it to me like that, I'd have been so happy. I'd love that. So I got to go now to the next one. Based on an underlying belief, and I'm going to kind of hide this such as for a bit. I mean, I need to know it's here. I need to read it at some point, but not on my first pass. The second sentence, based on an underlying belief that success is driven. Okay, so wait, what? Based on an underlying belief that success is driven by malleable characteristics, such as, if I don't know what the word malleable means, I'm going to use such as to help me understand what malleable characteristics are. Right? So management policies, hiring practices, personal qualities of leadership. Malleable means changeable. So based on some specific characteristics. So whoever wrote these texts thinks that success comes from things that you can do something about. Okay. The people who wrote these have suggested that if we look at those behaviors from carefully observing, then copying successful companies, that will be successful too. Okay. So this whole first paragraph is like, maybe we can see what qualities and behaviors and characteristics are being used by successful companies, financially successful companies, versus those that don't, and then let's copy them. Before you move to the second paragraph, because I still don't know what the point of the first paragraph was. I know what the first paragraph says. I don't know why the first paragraph is here because I don't know where we're going. So before we go anywhere, I want y'all to help me. This is a little activity that helps me get engaged in passages that are boring for me, which a lot of them can be. I want you to think, I wonder where this is going next. What are they going to tell me next? Imagine that this passage just went to a commercial break. What do you think they're going to talk about when we come back? What's coming back from the commercial break? Type it to me in the chat window. What is coming back to us in our commercial break? Ooh, okay, so maybe some examples. I love that. Yeah, maybe it's some examples of people who've done this, have tried this. Does it work? Maybe some evidence to show that this is a really great idea. This is so smart. Maybe they'll talk about exactly. I love that way. What qualities are most important? Yep, we did this, and here are the qualities that matter. Okay, I love all of this. So then, when you see this, yeah, I think Stuti might have been on a little bit of a psychic here. What do we think when the very first word in the next paragraph is however? It seems like the first paragraph may not have been a setup that we are just going to kind of continue to follow with. The first paragraph may have been a setup that we're going to attack. So we don't always know, right? Like, I don't know what the point of the first paragraph is until I start reading further. I still don't. I have to get further into this paragraph, right? I know what the first paragraph says. I don't know why it's important yet, right? So I want to distinguish that, what the thing says, and then like what the point is, though. Yeah. So if we get a little bit further into this paragraph, however, all businesses, regardless of their success, may become vulnerable to failure. So I want you to give this paragraph a read. And then at the end of it, I want y'all to type in the chat window 1 and 2. What did you think the point of paragraph 1 was? And what do you think the point of paragraph 2 is? Nice. I'm starting to get stuff in. Paragraph 1 was the premise. Paragraph 2 is a specific case of how the premise may not actually be so great. Ideal state versus now negotiation of this ideal state. I love presenting additional information about how this, like, we can't just look at this in a vacuum. We have to think about the macro environment. And I love, like, Sashi, that's great. General idea and then a contradiction. And so I might, for number 1, like, say paragraph 1 was all about sort of establishing a premise of sorts, right? It's this idea of, is it even possible to catalog qualities, success qualities? And then paragraph 2 is like, probably not, right? Because as we get to the close, yeah, I love that, Durga. This might not work. Is that it's like whatever qualities, like I feel like this is like the punchline, right? Like whatever qualities that may be shared among the relatively small number of long term survivors are inevitably shared by far more than just them. Like plenty of businesses and companies that don't succeed probably have a lot of those same qualities. And so there's probably a whole lot more to it than like, oh, let's look for some good business practices. Yeah. Okay, I love it. Excellent. So we've read the passage. I have a general sense, like we talk about kind of, you know, these 11 great companies, and then that all but one of them were basically had not done well. And then can we point to this very specific example, the Great Recession, the early 2000s, making us all feel old, or, the late uh, aughts, right? It's so long ago now that it's become a historical event, right? But now that we've got our passage, we go in to attack an individual question. And invariably, we will often get a primary purpose question. It's a big picture, main idea kind of question, right? When I think of primary purpose, I think of real estate, of land, right? I want an answer that covers as much ground as possible, meaning it summarizes to the best of my ability this whole passage without stepping too far out or without becoming way too narrow. You should be able to have a sense of this without the answer choices. However, primary purpose writers, like the authors of these questions, are very good at summing up an entire passage in like 6 words. And so I find that it's not common that we are able to know in a vacuum how abstract or detailed they're going to make the answer choices. So, the second thing I'm going to offer y'all as a like, maybe this isn't everybody's strategy, but I do find it really helpful. So the first being that I don't take a ton of notes. The second is to recognize that reading comp answer choices are short. Critical reasoning answer choices very, very long. Reading comp answer choices traditionally very, very short. I suggest that you read them all before you commit to eliminating very much. That we should really only eliminate an answer choice the first time we read it in reading comp if we are 1,000% certain. So if an answer choice here said to champion a genre of management texts as the great savior of business, okay, I could probably eliminate that, right? Like right away. But anything more subtle than that, I may not eliminate on first pass. I may be suspect, but I'm not going to eliminate. So when my answer choices hit the screen, right, the first thing I'll do, I'll write down my letters A, B, C, D, E. And then I might put a line through things that I don't like, or I might put a line next to, or like a check mark next to any that stand out at me as possible. Okay. So with reading comprehension, I want you to have a mental prediction of what is the primary purpose. Many of you have already said it. And then I want you to find an answer choice that matches. So give that one a go and then pull in with your answer when you've got it. Mm, yeah. I love this. I've got a lot of people down to A and D. Few more popping in. Yeah. Okay. So what are some things that we can definitely eliminate? So one of the things I'm going to say is this idea of like argue. Right? Like we're definitely not here to argue anything. And we want to be very careful of things like all companies are equally vulnerable to failure regardless of their historical financial success. That's not what this is saying. This is both too strong and in too many ways, right? The language here is just way, way, way too strong. So be careful, right? Be careful. B, are we contrasting the actual features of successful companies with those that are not successful? No, we didn't actually learn any of them, right? We were told that characteristics generically, like policies and practices, but we weren't told that successful companies have these type, not successful companies have these type. So we weren't actually able to ever contrast the actual features. That didn't exist. That was not in our not in our passage anywhere. We have no evidence for that. I don't hate the word contrast because we are contrasting, but it doesn't quite fit here. Describe, that could be okay. Describe is an okay word. The influence of a certain category of management literature on business. No, I don't know how influential this body of text is. We're introducing this body of text, we're describing the body of text, but not necessarily the influence that this body of text has. So, no. All right. So, we're getting down to A and D. So here's the deal. I love how people are like, I don't know, that second paragraph is like really leaning in on D, right? I think the thing is, right, the passage brings up external factors, right? Despite the common factors identified in the culture of these great companies, external factors overwhelmed any effect that may have come from ambitious blah, 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 blah. In fact, all these other things. Here is one thing to note about answer choice D, though. Did anybody take issue with answer choice D? Because I think D leans into how we might feel that this is an opinionated passage. But did anybody look at D and think, I don't know, I'm not, that part makes me a little nervous. Yeah, they do. And I'm just wanting to sort of check in. What do you think? Hmm. Yeah, so I think one of the things we want to consider. Oh, I can. I think one of the things it doesn't consider is this idea that it says external factors outweigh internal factors in determining the financial success of a company. I think the real issue with D here isn't that there's not some evidence to support that it certainly happened in this case, right? But I think one of the bigger potential issues that I would have with D is this idea that it almost feels like an always, right? It's like it always does this, right? It's always like this. And I think that that's a little bit problematic. I think that that's a little bit, it can be a little bit problematic that it's kind of giving us an always, all the time vibe. Whereas we are kind of questioning the validity. Like, is this true? Are these things real? Right? Like, can we actually do this? Is this possible? And so for me, I think that I would be a little nervous in a main idea question, right? Like, just a little bit nervous in a main idea question if the answer choice was this strong, right? Like, we're talking about an extremely strong answer here, right? And so I think for me, I would want to, or I would lean in more towards an answer A. That the point of the passage isn't entirely to say that all external factors outweigh internal factors all the time, no matter what. But to say we should question whether, is there really such a thing of practices that will determine that you succeed and determine that you fail? I think D would be a much more valid choice if it said that external factors could or sometimes outweigh internal factors. But they aren't the only thing. Yeah. I mean, like, there are internal factors that can determine whether a company is financially successful. They just might at times combat or go up against external factors. Right. I think the issue with D is it's over strong. Now, I had a great question in the chat window to kind of look at this idea of, I think you use the language dismantle, right? Like, can you say, um, so the difficulty level of the passage is quite tricky. And so I would say outweigh is a strong word. Yes, I would say the fact that they don't say sometimes is what means always. So one thing to note about the GMAT is that the GMAT isn't, they don't exaggerate. They're literal with their language. And so if they want to soften something to not mean always, they will use softened language. So if softening language is missing, you have to like demonstrate that external factors outweigh internal factors in determining means they just do, no matter what, period. And so I think that that becomes the issue with D is it's too strong. Yep. Okay, we're going to do another question of the same type. I want to show you two more just really quickly. But a highlight for this passage is our first job is to make sure that we understand the question, because in the next question, we're going to have to go look for proof. We want to identify our question. Then we want to go back and find support because we have to look in. Once we found support, we're going to predict an answer to the question in a way more specific than the way we just did. And then we're going to use a process of elimination. Yep. Okay, so we just saw a primary purpose kind of main idea question. If this question hit the screen with this sort of language, what do you think it's asking for? What does that language mean? Beautiful. So in order to this idea of why was something mentioned? Right. So in the last sentence, the author mentions, right, this more than 100,000 new businesses. Why? Right? That's what this is asking. Why is the author bringing up these 100,000 new businesses? What's the author's point? What are they trying to achieve or accomplish by bringing this up? Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit of this, like, kind of prove the point that there are over 100,000 new businesses just in the US, and only a small number of them succeed. If you've got 100,000 new businesses, they must, right? They must in that space have at least some overlap in their qualities. So is there actually a set of unique qualities, right? Like, really? A set of actually unique qualities that we could identify? Okay, so we'll take our answer choices and again, only eliminate on the first pass anything that feels like what I would call egregious, like absolutely not going to work. So as you move through these, I want you to type in the chat window, as you would eliminate, tell me the answer choice and why you eliminated it. I love, I'm starting to get some thoughts in. So again, as you eliminate, I want you to type that letter and tell me why you're eliminating. And you don't have to eliminate in order. You can eliminate in any order you want. Okay, so I'm loving some of the ideas that I'm getting from everybody. So let's start with what we can definitely eliminate. We're not criticizing the author. I mean, we're kind of criticizing the authors of these management texts, but we're not criticizing them for studying an inadequate number of companies. That wasn't the point. The bringing up that many companies wasn't to say you didn't look at enough companies. It was to say that there's no way there could be that many companies that don't have a ton of overlap in their behaviors. Right? And we're not saying that we should be studying, some different type of company. And then we're not talking about the negative consequences of imitating successful companies. We're saying that just because you do, you might not be successful. Not that if you do, you're in trouble. So we get to B and C that I think are both like, oh gosh. And so this is where we want to like, what does it mean to have drawn faulty conclusions? What does that mean, faulty conclusion? Because here's where we need to be a little bit careful. Faulty means problematic. It doesn't necessarily mean completely and totally wrong. Faulty would mean that it's not quite right, right? There's a softness to faulty. They would have said invalid, right? So you could think if they said faulty, that's similar to saying flawed, right? So there's a softness to be that the demonstrate that the authors have drawn some not great conclusions regarding the causes of success. Maybe because they've fully forgotten that external factors play a role as well. C says incorrectly, which is tough because does the author say nope, the characteristics they identified were wrong. They were wrong. Those are the wrong qualities. No. The author of this passage doesn't say that they identified incorrect qualities, just that identifying some qualities isn't really the whole story. And maybe you can't even identify qualities. Like that might not even really be a thing. And so the language of suggest is fantastic, but they're not suggesting that they have incorrectly identified the qualities that are shared. just that the qualities that they've identified may not be exhaustive, nor may they be as powerful. And so we're looking, as always, in these kind of like broader big picture sort of spaces. Why are they talking about this? They didn't bring up these businesses to say that these emerging text authors were incorrect in their factoids. They were flawed in their predictions. And so our correct answer is, in fact, B. So I think one of the biggest things that a lot of us can take is that, particularly as we start to work on passages, even when we understand the material, that we have to make sure that we're really in the head of how these questions are asked. So primary purpose or specific purpose, this like in order to, we want to think of these as, all right, I need to stay in the soft, squishy language of the passage. And rarely are these passages like angry and defiant, never always, right? And so we want to stay away from some of that. Yeah. Okay. So we have tons and tons. If you want more work on predictions, if you want more work on reading passages, come hang out with us at Manhattan Prep. Go to the GMAT Club site. We've done tons of stuff with them on Reading Comp there. Even in all of, like, you can go in and look through all of the message boards and see all of like us, our back and forth with students just like you. If you didn't see the rest of this sequence, you've got in the description for this event, we've got the recordings of the other two. So parts 1 and 2 of this 3-part event. Again, my name is Whitney. I wanted to make sure and pass along that we have a free starter kit available to anyone. Just go to our website at manhattanprep.com and you can get a ton of free resources from GMAT, Jerry, and EA. And as an attendee today, as a GMAT Club special, we've got a code for $75 off any complete 5, 7, or 9 week course. And so that's for the GMAT, the Jerry, or the EA, all of your MBA needs. And you can get that by just typing in GMAT Club 75. That doesn't work for our corporate or institutional, but come on and hang out. And if you sign up for any of our session 1s, you can sign up for session 1 for free and attend to see if it's a class that you'd like to continue to come to further. So don't forget, like and subscribe. Thank you so much to GMAT Club for hosting us. Thank you so much to all of you for staying up late, hanging out with me. Again, my name is Whitney from Manhattan Prep. It has been a pleasure to get to hang out with you, and we'll see you around soon.